I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tajikistan to introduce an address by the head of state.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, it's my great honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement by His Excellency, Mr. Emomali Rahmon, the President of the Republic of Tajikistan.
Distinguished Chairman, Excellency Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to convey my congratulations to the Chairman of this session of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, on his election to this post. Dear colleagues, on September 9, the glorious people of Tajikistan celebrated historic and memorable event, the 30th anniversary of Tajikistan's national independence. In the early years of our independence, our country was plunged into the tragic events of the imposed civil war and went through difficult days. Ending the war, bringing the fighting parties together, ensuring peace and stability, and concurrently restoring diplomatic relations and constructive cooperation with the countries of the world were among our top priorities. Despite the existing difficulties, and thanks to the open doors policy and peace, we have managed to take a merit position on the world stage and ensure sustainable development of our country. Dear colleagues, the already volatile situation in the current world is further complicated by geopolitical and geo-economic competition and the growing level of threats and challenges, as well as unprecedented spread of infectious diseases. This situation doubles the responsibility of states to pursue a far-sighted and coordinated policy to address the current challenges. The role of international and regional organizations, especially the United Nations and its specialized agencies, is key to finding effective solutions to the problems of the current world. Mr. Chairman, recent developments in Afghanistan linked to the political and humanitarian crisis and governance pose a serious threat to regional security and stability. The crisis situation in Afghanistan, which shares almost 1,400 kilometers of border with Tajikistan, cannot leave the government and the people of our country indifferent. The rise to power of the Taliban, which is listed as a terrorist group by the United Nations Security Council, has further deteriorated the region's already complex geopolitical process. The Taliban's failure to deliver on its earlier promises to form an inclusive government with a broad representation of Afghan political and ethnic forces is a matter of our deep concern. Tajikistan strongly condemns all forms of lawlessness, murder, looting, and oppression against the people of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, human rights organizations have remained silent on the violation of the rights of other ethnic groups residing in Afghanistan and the freedom of its citizens, especially women and children, and have not commented on this matter. As in the case of Panjshir province in Afghanistan, we are witnessing a tragic violation of international human rights. The people of Panjshir have no access to food, other basic supplies, as well as humanitarian aid, and even the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross are still unable to enter Panjshir to fulfill their humanitarian obligations. The current situation is a humanitarian catastrophe. The growing intensity of fights between the ethnic groups and tribes in Afghanistan is yet another factor further destabilizing political and security situation in our neighboring country. In view of this, the establishment of comprehensive dialogue with the participation of all segments of Afghan society is one of the major preconditions for the establishment of lasting peace and enduring stability in this war-ravaged country. In this regard, along with other ethnic groups of this country, the Tajiks of Afghanistan, who comprise more than 46% of the population, have the right to take their deserved part in the public affairs. Mr. Chairman, we will not interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. However, we believe that in order to properly address political and security challenges of the neighboring country, it is necessary to form an inclusive government through elections based on the will of the people of this country, with the engagement of all political groups and national and ethnic minorities. Thus, in our view, it is necessary to determine the structure of government in the country through a referendum by respecting position of all citizens. Formation of any government without taking into account the interests of all people of Afghanistan can lead to catastrophic consequences in this country. During more than 40 years of war and instability, which the Afghan people are not to blame for, Afghanistan has become a geopolitical platform, and the world is well aware of the consequences of the horrible events of September 2001. The suffering of Afghanistan and its friendly and brotherly nation should not be dragged into the abyss of imposed bloody wars again. In this regard, the international community should not remain indifferent to the fate of the peoples and nations living in Afghanistan and its neighbors. Hence, they have a long way to go, full of military and humanitarian problems which have arisen due to the reckless decision to withdraw foreign troops from this country. As a close neighbor, we are always in favor of a comprehensive solution to the Afghan conflict and the restoration of lasting peace and stability in this country, and we will continue to stand firm in this position. In this regard, we call on the international community to take immediate and effective measures to stabilize the difficult political and security situation and ensure genuine peace and overall stability in Afghanistan through peaceful means at the earliest possible. Tajikistan has called on the international organizations, in particular the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross, on several occasions to provide immediate assistance to the Afghan people. We believe that the United Nations should play a key role in advancing this process. Dear colleagues, the peaceful people of Afghanistan today are faced with terror. We need to understand that this is not the fault of the Afghan people, but that it was organized from the outside and imposed on the Afghan people. In this case, we are talking about the massacre of civilians, brutal killing of former members of the national security forces and civil servants of Afghanistan. Different terrorist groups are actively using an unstable military and political situation in Afghanistan to strengthen their position. We have witnessed the release of thousands of members of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups. In other words, it is a matter of deep concern and regret that today Afghanistan is once again on the path to becoming a breeding ground for international terrorism. Tajikistan, which due to its geographical location is at the forefront of countering modern threats and challenges such as terrorism, extremism, radicalization, drug trafficking, and other transnational organized crime, will continue its efforts to prevent their further spread and believes that the support of the international community is essential in this process. Dear colleagues, Tajikistan is continuously making joint effort with its partners and international organizations, in particular the relevant institutions of the United Nations, to ensure lasting peace and stability throughout the world. Successful implementation of Tajikistan National Strategy on Combating Terrorism and Extremism for 2016-2020 has laid down a solid ground for the development and adoption of a new counter-terrorism and extremism strategy in Tajikistan for the next 5 years. Countering the trafficking in narcotics, psychotropic substances and precursors, the proceeds of which are one of the main sources of funding for international terrorism, requires joint action and coordinated efforts by the international community. The Republic of Tajikistan, which has gained noticeable experience through the implementation of its National Counter-Narcotics Strategy 2020, also contributes to combating this phenomena at the regional and international levels. Taking into account modern methods and approaches to combat this challenge, and in order to pursue an effective policy in this area, we have adopted our National Drugs Control Strategy for 2021-2030 and the first semester of this year. Mr. Chairman, we in Tajikistan are well aware of the value of peace and the importance of its protection. We are satisfied with the positive experience in our country's cooperation with the United Nations. Tajikistan has always supported the peacekeeping activities of the United Nations and will continue to make efforts to contribute to the restoration and maintenance of peace and stability in the conflict zone throughout the world. We intend to increase the number of our officers to contribute to this process in the future in cooperation with the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations. In order to contribute to the implementation of the goals and objectives of the United Nations Security Council, to share the rich experience of Tajikistan in countering security threats and restore full peace and stability through negotiations, we decided to nominate our country for non-permanent membership of this council for 2028 and 2029. In this regard, we stand ready for cooperation with all UN member states and hope that they will support Tajikistan's candidacy. Dear colleagues, the COVID-19 disease and its more dangerous waves remain a cause for concern along with the above-mentioned security threats and challenges. This disease, which originally began as a health crisis, has led to a global economic crisis. Having recognizing the importance of cooperation among countries in overcoming the negative socio-economic consequences of the pandemic, the Republic of Tajikistan welcomes the United Nations Comprehensive Response to COVID-19 launched by the Secretary General. We also welcome the efforts of various organizations, foundations and programs of the United Nations, including the World Health Organization, in providing vaccines against this disease, as well as immediate and long-term targeted assistance to member states. Economic and financial performance of countries and the negative consequences of COVID-19 will delay the timely implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in developing and least developed countries. Therefore, recognizing the important role of the United Nations in effective and timely implementation of these goals, we are confident that the Decade of Action to Achieve Sustainable Development Goals 2020-2030 will facilitate to find effective ways to address global challenges, including climate change, poverty, gender inequality, and funding. Dear colleagues, climate change challenges are also a serious obstacle to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in many countries, including Tajikistan. Tajikistan, with 93% of its territory covered by mountains, is concerned, along with other countries in the region, about changes in the hydrological cycle leading to severe floods and droughts and causing a negative impact on water, energy, and food security. Unfortunately, our country loses hundreds of millions of dollars annually as a result of waterborne disasters, and in many cases, natural disasters cause human losses and destruct vital infrastructure. We are today on the eve of the 26th session of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. We believe that this meeting will significantly contribute to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and accelerate the efforts of the international community in the fight against climate change. One of the serious consequences of this process is the melting of glaciers. As a result of climate change and unprecedented warming, more than 1,000 of the 13,000 glaciers in Tajikistan's mountains have completely melted. According to the available statistics, the Fachenko Glacier alone has shrunk to 11 square kilometers in recent decades in Tajikistan and lost 2 cubic kilometers of ice. This all is happening despite the fact that up to 60% of Central Asia's water resources originate from Tajikistan glaciers. Our country ranks 135th in the world in terms of carbon dioxide emissions and produces 96% of its electricity in hydroelectric power stations. As a head of state and as such a country, I've made concrete proposals at international conferences on several occasions to find solutions to the problems associated with climate change. As a member of the founding group of the World Water and Climate Coalition, I proposed at its first high-level meeting to declare the year of 2025 as the International Year for Glaciers Preservation. It is my firm belief that this initiative will help to attract more attention of the world community to the water and climate agenda and the melting of glaciers. The establishment of the International Fund for Glaciers Preservation under the auspices of the United Nations is another step that could provide a basis for comprehensive research and effective solutions to these global challenges. Mr. Chairman, Tajikistan is recognized as an initiator and champion country and contributes to the process of promoting water and climate agenda and the global development agenda and submitting relevant UN resolutions on these issues. The International Decade for Action Water for Sustainable Development 2018-2028, initiated by Tajikistan and declared by the United Nations, is under implementation today. The international community is looking forward to the United Nations Conference on the comprehensive mid-term review of this decade to be held in New York in 2023. As in almost 50 years, this will be the second special conference of the United Nations on water, which will once again demonstrate a key role of water issues and the global development agenda and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are proud that Tajikistan, together with the Kingdom of Netherlands, are elected as co-chair of this important international forum. In this regard, we have already begun preparations with our partners, including with the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, and are taking steps to organize a comprehensive and high-level conference. We would like to encourage all stakeholders to cooperate extensively in this process. Let me recall that in 2022, our country will host the International High-Level Conference on the review of the International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development. We believe that this forum will play an important role in the preparation for the 2023 Water Conference. I take this opportunity to reaffirm my country's preparedness and commitment to advance water and climate agenda at all levels, particularly in cooperation with the United Nations. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Tajikistan for the statement just made. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda to introduce an address by the Head of State.